Miss S. Lee stood in her empty classroom one last time. After 30 years of teaching, today was her final day. The walls were bare now, missing the colorful posters and children's artwork that had made the room feel alive for so many years. She walked to her desk and opened the bottom drawer. There was only one thing left inside, an old red notebook. She picked it up carefully, feeling its worn cover under her fingers. This notebook was her most precious possession, filled with letters and notes from her students over the years. As she opened it, a small piece of paper fell out. It was a drawing of a stick figure with "Best Teacher Ever" written in messy child's handwriting. It was from Tommy, her current student who had trouble reading. She remembered how scared he was on his first day, trying to hide his reading problems from everyone.
Mrs. Lee?
A voice called from the doorway. She looked up to see Tommy standing there with his mother. In his hands was a small, wrapped package.
Tommy, what are you doing here?
Mrs. Lee asked, smiling. School had ended 2 hours ago.
I wanted to give you something.
Tommy said, walking to her desk.
Because you're leaving.
His voice was sad, but his eyes were bright with excitement about his gift. Miss S. Lee carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a book, Charlotte's Web. It was the first book Tommy had managed to read all by himself, with her help.
Open it!
Tommy said eagerly. Inside the cover, Tommy had written in his best handwriting, "Dear Miss S. Lee, thank you for helping me learn to read. You never gave up on me. Now I love books." From Tommy. Miss S. Lee felt tears coming to her eyes. She remembered the many afternoons spent with Tommy, patiently helping him sound out words. She remembered his frustration, his tears, and finally, his triumph when he read his first story alone.
That's not all.
Tommy's mother said. She handed Miss S. Lee an envelope.
Some of your old students heard you were retiring. They wanted to send you something too.
Miss S. Lee opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were letters, dozens of them. She began to read. Dear Miss S. Lee, I'm now an English teacher because of you. Miss S. Lee, my daughter is reading your favorite book, Charlotte's Web. Thank you, Miss S. Lee, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Each letter told a story of how she had touched someone's life. Some were from students she had taught decades ago, others from more recent years. They had all remembered her. Tommy watched as Mrs. Lee read the letters.
Mom says, you taught her too.
He said proudly. Mrs. Lee looked at Tommy's mother and suddenly recognized her.
Sarah, little Sarah Wilson.
Sarah nodded, smiling.
Class of 1999. You helped me with my multiplication tables. I never forgot how patient you were.
Mrs. Lee hadn't just taught children to read and write. She had taught 3 generations in this small town. She had watched her students grow up, have children of their own, and send those children to her classroom.
We have one more surprise,
Sarah said. She walked to the door and opened it. The hallway was filled with people, former students, parents, and colleagues. They streamed into the classroom, each carrying a book.
We're starting a reading corner at the public library.
Sarah explained.
It will be called Mrs. Lee's Corner. Each book has a note inside from someone whose life you touched.
Miss S. Lee sat at her desk, overwhelmed by the love surrounding her. Tommy stood next to her, proudly showing her his favorite parts of Charlotte's Web. Around them, her former students shared memories of their time in her class. Later that evening, as Mrs. Lee packed up her red notebook and Tommy's gift, she realized that teaching had given her more than she had ever given her students. Every child who had sat in her classroom had left a mark on her heart. As she turned off the lights one last time, Miss S. Lee smiled. Her teaching days might be over, but her influence would live on in every student who discovered the joy of reading, in every person who remembered her kindness, and in a special corner of the library where future generations would discover the magic of books. Walking to her car, she heard Tommy's voice calling out.
Goodbye, Miss S. Lee. I'll visit you at the library.
Goodbye, Tommy.
she whispered.
Keep reading.
The setting sun painted the school building in warm golden light as Miss S. Lee drove away. In her bag, the red notebook and Tommy's copy of Charlotte's Web held 30 years of memories, love, and the greatest gift a teacher could receive, knowing that she had made a difference.